Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of May, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in studio, Mike Robinson. Well, a lovely sunny day here in Plymouth, wall-to-wall blue sky, sunshine, just a little bit chilly. We'll leave it there. Where are we going to start? Theresa May has been under great pressure because she's been difficult to track down during the election campaign. This one we found particularly interesting. This is our local Plymouth Herald, and the story is that Tory MP-to-be, presumably, Oliver Colville, could not consent to attend a hustings at the local Devonport church. So top left, we've got the minister from the church who's very upset because his MP has said, well, I'm not quite sure I can come to your church. Now, we did a little bit of research into this article, and it becomes really quite fascinating because very quickly you find mention of Churches Together, which is an organisation linking churches across UK. But when you take a little look at the website, it does seem to move us on a little bit between from Christian matters to perhaps something more political. We can then move across to this one, which is Christians in Politics, and very quickly we can go to this one, which is Christians in Westminster. And what's the connection with these? Well, it's this gentleman, my personal MP, Gary Streeter, who is chairing in these two organisations. And if we follow those through, then we find this organisation connected, Christians on the left, and we can also go across to another organisation, Religious Liberty. What is my point? Well, my point is that when we think that a parliamentary candidate is going to speak within his previous constituency as part of an invite from a local church, that doesn't happen because there are much bigger, presumably more important political events being set up with the very hand of Westminster in these events. So what I think we're looking at here is the abject politicisation of the church, to the extent that that politicised church is then helping supposedly in the election campaign.
If we go back to 2010 when you stood, Brian, there was a hustings held in the Methodist Church in Plymouth, which was utterly controlled by the mainstream parties, it seemed to me, because of course independent candidates were not allowed to speak.
Well, this is true. This was the Central Methodist Hall, if I remember correctly, and they were not keen to let me in. Well, they didn't invite me. So if you were not accepted by the Christian church, you weren't given an invite to the hustings. So I was standing as an independent anti-corruption candidate. I was not invited. The Green Party was not invited, and BNP was not invited. I wonder whether Gary Streeter's organisations had a hand in that hustings, and hence we might see while some candidates are gently pushed out. But this is one of the key things that we're starting to see as we dig deeper in this election, is what looks like a bona fide organisation. Dig a little deeper and you're not finding connections back into the Conservative Party. We wonder whether we're going to see this in other areas, maybe in education, NHS, possibly even defence. But before we leave this particular element of the news, just have a look at this one. Here's Christians on the left, election 2017. This is more political, Mike, than it seems to me anything to do with a Christian viewpoint. But I was quite taken by this element on their website, which says that if you love your country, you should pay your tax.
Hashtag patriots pay tax.
Yeah.
Right.
So the story is here that as Christians on the left, we believe in a society to which all contribute and which cares for its citizens. And when implemented fairly, taxation should not be seen as a burden. So they say pay your taxes. So presumably they're saying that taxation is fair.
And it doesn't matter how many atrocities are perpetrated by your government, keep funding it.
keep funding, keep paying those taxes to keep a government which is clearly not Christian in power. And we better emphasise the point, because if you go and have a look at these so-called Christians in Westminster, Gary Streeter features very strongly as chair, but we've also got Mr. Farron in that organisation as well. Of course, the man who didn't want to take any action on the Syrian children. But what is happening here? It seems to me that the Christian ethic has been taken over by the Westminster ethic, and what's operating is certainly not Christian. At least nobody is complaining at this gentleman. It took Russia Today to flag this one up. But apparently back in 2015, Stephen Fry was taken to task for calling God mean-minded and stupid. And this was part of his quote. He said, "Because God, who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac, an utter maniac, totally selfish, we have to spend our lives on our knees thanking him. What kind of God would do that?" So I haven't heard a lot from Mr. Streeter on that particular issue. I'll leave our audience to think about the rights or wrongs of that particular incident.
Okay, well, sticking with the election then, Theresa May this morning saying another manifesto. Well, she didn't say this. This is what she would have said if she was telling the truth, of course. Another manifesto, another lie. Immigration will be kept to the tens of thousands. Of course, if you invite millions of people into the country, that is multiples of tens of thousands. So perhaps she's not lying at all. But anyway, she is saying that she's going to make this manifesto pledge once again. I can't remember how many manifestos this pledge has been made in. I think it's 2, and it hasn't been acted upon just yet. But let's think about why she might be lying. And I'm going to just bring this up once again, because, of course, state pensions, forget about the issue of social care for the elderly. State pensions, the black hole, the obligations that the state has to people that are living in this country at the moment exceed £5 trillion. This is unpayable. The state pension scheme is a Ponzi scheme. It requires taxpayers to be paying in order that it can pay out for the elderly. So for pensioners. So of course, if we don't have a younger demographic, we can't pay that money out. So the country is left with a choice of either killing our old people or increasing immigration. So that's one reason I would suspect that Theresa May is lying, because she has got no option but to maintain immigration at certain levels. Of course, there are other geopolitical reasons why she wants to maintain immigration at certain levels. But let's just mention this one and ask, what is she going to do about the situation with state pensions?
She's simply not going to talk about it, Mike. Obviously, Theresa May is not talking about anything of any importance during this election. She'll deal with this issue by simply not talking about it.
Well, let's talk about immigration a bit more then. Here's Common Purpose, and they're holding an event later in the year. It's going to be called the Diaspora Dialogues, and the Diaspora Dialogues are going to bring together leaders from diaspora across the world. It's going to be held in Armenia. So Common Purpose absolutely operating in all kinds of countries around the world at the moment. So they're holding this event in Armenia. And they say that the Diaspora Dialogues will bring together leaders from diaspora across the world, leaders who are familiar with operating in multiple cultures and geographies, leaders who connect global and local, having spent their whole lives with their feet in multiple places, leaders who are natural interpreters, communicators, and bridge builders, leaders who are uniquely valuable in a world that is becoming more fragmented. So they say that they raise the issue of why now. They say the balance between local and global is being reset across the world. We need a global bridge more than ever before. Fragmentation between generations is increasing. They say migration will continue to flow and increase, they're saying, with global warming. Diaspora leaders are often innovators, they say, although ideas do not always flow between diaspora. So they're wanting to bring these leaders from different diaspora together in order to turn the diaspora of various cultures into one mush.
That's the overriding objective, and diaspora, new word brought in, cultural intelligence, another phrase used by Common Purpose, but they seem very aware that this movement, mass migration of people, is not only going to continue, it's going to accelerate. How does Julia Middleton from Common Purpose know this? Presumably in the same way that she knew that there was going to be a coalition between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. So stay on the subject, but come in from a different angle. Let's come across to the French elections and great celebrations as the Rothschild man gets in with whatever it was, 66% of the vote. What I didn't see before we came live was what the turnout was in France, but obviously we're being told a convincing win by this man that seemed to come out of nowhere, Mike. Everybody in the establishment loved him, and then surprise, surprise, he wins. I've just indicated there that he has got his wife, Bridget, with him, and we're going to have a little look at her in a moment. But I was fascinated by this photograph because as I looked at it, I thought to myself, well, there seems to be a bit of the power pyramid in the background, but I thought it was just my imagination. But actually, when I got further on through the article, of course, the reality is quite easy to see because he did his talk in front of that wonderful pyramid structure in front of the Louvre. So we had a pyramid and two columns for people who are interested in symbology. Perhaps that's accidental, or perhaps there's a bit more to it. But fascinating, Mike, that so many people in France should lock on to this man without really knowing who he is, what his background is, and suddenly he's propelled into power.
As the non-conformist?
As the non-conformist conformist candidate. And perhaps we better start then with this article here, which this is Sarah Vine from the Mail, and this is from a few days ago. But she says, I know they're French, but Macron's love story is weird. If the roles were reversed, people would be repulsed. Well, what is she talking about? Well, she's talking that Brigitte was Emmanuel's teacher, and the love affair started when she was 39 and he was 15.
As you do.
Well, I was just going to pop in here, is, that was her morality at the time. If she'd have been male and he'd have been female, then somebody would be saying, well, is this a paedophile at work? But we don't say that because it's a woman, because many people are mistaken that women don't get involved in this sort of stuff. So I just wonder what her education policies would be if that's the norm for her. Is it now going to be acceptable? Because she says that he's been elected, but she's going to take a position of power.
Excellent.
Okay. And then it goes on because unfortunately there's been information about Mr. Macron rapidly spreading across the internet. But according to The Guardian, these are linked to Russian-affiliated groups. So this is all pretty pertinent stuff. I just found I had to put this heading in here because it was definitely those nasty Russians, and clearly he's going to be crying to his wife, mummy, whatever she is, about this situation. And if you want to get some information on this, then there's quite a bit starting to come out on the internet. Some of it's quite sort of speculative, others very measured, and it's going through what is a mass of documents revealing that this man has some very unusual offshore business interests, which, if the material is true, it clearly means he's involved as a minimum in tax evasion. But if you have a look on YouTube, there's quite a lot of headlines now on this subject. And why am I pointing you at YouTube? Well, simply, if we were to look at the Guardian article, what do they have to say? They say that basically two organisations have done the research which shows links to the Russians. So we've got the New York Flashpoint Intelligence, and we've got Tokyo Trend Micro. So clearly these are not GCHQ and government intelligence centres. Whatever they are, that's where the intelligence has come from. And they blame Fancy Bear, they blame Advanced Persistent Threat 28, and Porn Storm, and they say that these are linked to Russian GRU.
Okay.
So the evidence is quite clearly there on screen, or not. What does The Guardian then say? Well, it says that Vitaly Kremez, Director of Research at Flashpoint, said his review indicated Advanced Persistent Threat 28 was behind the leak of documents. That all sounds pretty good. And then he goes on to say this: if indeed driven by Moscow, this link appears to be a significant escalation over the previous Russian operations aimed at the US presidential election, expanding the approach and scope of effort from simple espionage efforts towards more direct attempts to sway the outcome. If. So when we go through the Guardian article, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the Russians are behind the leak of this material. That's the first point. And the second point is the Guardian simply ignores the information that's come in those leaked documents about offshore companies and highly suspicious business interests. So it's blame the Russians with no evidence and then simply ignore the information which is now being put in front of the press. This is worse than fake news, Mike, because this is propaganda to actually skew people's minds as to what's actually happening here.
Yes.
And to link in with immigration, this is part of the information that's being leaked. This is a PowerPoint presentation which is talking supposedly about plans for the Islamization of France and Europe. It's talking about the continuation of mass migration. And what some of the commentators say is that it is interesting that some of the events described in this PowerPoint presentation have already appeared and been reported in the mainstream press. So it seems that there's already a line of thought which says, well, we can't dismiss this as fake because some of it's already been reported in the press. And we are going to say, of course, what's really happening here is that migration and the suffering is being used as a geopolitical weapon. And let's remember this gentleman who basically was happy to say as a Bilderberger, we need migration to help break down nation states within the EU. So this is Peter Sutherland, and he's happy to say we need this migration to achieve our geopolitical aims. And surprise, surprise, we've got leaked documents around Macron saying exactly the same thing.
And we shouldn't remember the slightly darker side of this as well, because of course with the migration comes the people trafficking and the sex slavery and the organ trafficking. And of course this is being used to fund some pretty dark agenda in Northern Africa and in the Middle East.
Indeed.
And speaking of the Middle East, in Syria, talks have begun, according to France 24's Associated Press, I suppose. Talks have begun on evacuating rebels from Damascus. They're saying negotiations were underway on Sunday on evacuating insurgents and their families from 2 districts in Damascus, and that was according to a Syrian military source. And they say that if the talks are successful, this will be the first time rebels have been evacuated from Syria's capital since the country's conflict broke out 6 years ago. And of course, this is related to the de-escalation zones and so on, although Damascus is not actually included in any of the so-called de-escalation zones that have been shown so far. And in the meantime, of course, Russia and the United States, not really being reported by the Western media, seem to be continuing to develop sort of closer discussions over Syria at the moment. So Sergei Lavrov was speaking to Mir television over the weekend and saying that he had been speaking to Rex Tillerson, that things were developing nicely there, and hopefully they're going to build a bit of a better relationship. He said in the light of the results of the international meeting on Syria in Astana on the 3rd and 4th of May, the 2 top diplomats discussed the tasks of de-escalating the situation in that country, ensuring sustainability of the ceasefire, building up anti-terrorist efforts, and enlivening external support for the intra-Syria negotiating process. Well, then he went on to talk about NATO, and he said that NATO became bitter that its project aimed at bringing the entirety of Ukraine into its sphere of influence, making Ukraine part of the North Atlantic Alliance, and causing and using Crimea to encircle Russia fell through. So they were bitter about that, and that's why relationships between Russia and NATO have collapsed to a low. He said that the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a defense organization he describes containing Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan, that development strategy does not mention any country or organization as our adversary. So they're not criticizing NATO in terms of calling them an enemy or an adversary. In contrast, he said NATO members perceive Russia as an opponent or even a threat and attempt to downplay the status and importance of CSTO activities. So while there seems to be a growing relationship between Russia and the United States with regard to Syria, the continuing sort of downscaling of the relationship between Russia and NATO, well, that continues to get worse.
But luckily, we're going to get the F-35B.
Well, before we get to the F-35B, we've got the F-35A, and well, for weeks now, the Defense Department of the United States has said that the F-35A will not be flying at the Paris Air Show, and all of a sudden they've done a U-turn and decided that it will be flying at the Paris Air Show, which is quite amazing that it's flying at all, I suppose. But anyway, they say that well, it's going to take place following its first ever training deployment in Europe this April. So they're quite confident that it can be shown at Paris quite successfully. The F-35A strengthens partnerships and improves regional stability, they said. We welcome the opportunity to further demonstrate the revolutionary capabilities of this aircraft.
Good.
Yes. Okay. And well, let's get on to the F-35B, because Italy has just rolled its first F-35B from its plant in Cameri. This is the first one, and apparently the second one is going to be built in about a year. So it's going to take them a year to build the second one.
Well, then they will have two. That's a 100% increce, which is yes. That's a powerful force.
Absolutely. So this has been built in Italy, okay, and now that it's been rolled out of the hangar, it's going to be handed over to the Italian Air Force, who are going to do some what they're describing as confidence flights, and following that, it's going to be flown across the United States to Maryland for certification and crew training early in 2018. So now, as I understand it, was PricewaterhouseCoopers that decided that this was a cost-effective way to produce these aircraft.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like a terribly cost-effective way if you have to build them in Italy and then fly them over to the United States uncertified in order for them to be certified.
This is geopolitical engineering on reheat, to use a bit of a pun. The objective is to do with the political machinations around the procurement and design of these military systems. So this is locking states together around a project. What's produced at the end can be of any standard. And of course, originally we had the multi-role combat aircraft where everybody in Europe put a little bit in, and what came out was just a very poor compromise. So something similar going on here, Mike, I think, at the end of the day. And we better just give credit to the person in our chat room that said, well, remember that an F-35 can't actually get from A to B.
Yeah, well, that's true. But just to finish this off then, of course, Britain getting its F-35Bs from the United States. The F-35Bs that are going to be built by Italy will go to the Italian Air Force and also to the Dutch Air Force. And since the Dutch Air Force is rapidly being rolled into the German Air Force, I guess that's eventually where they'll end up.
And then we end up with that as the standard aircraft across Europe, and effectively the American defence industry controls the European defence industry. Well, let's bring in Europe and the European banks. And thank you very much to the person who sent this through to us. A nice little advert and a recent article for the European Bank. So it says, EBRD, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, EU and TBC Bank to help Georgian companies grasp new trade opportunities. And what a wonderful article this is, because of course this is about these nice banks giving money to businesses to help small businesses grow and therefore nation states to grow. So this is some of the detail. It says the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the European Union are expanding their joint programme with TBC Bank to support the development of small and medium-sized enterprises in Georgia by adopting EU standards to make them more competitive on international markets, thus allowing them to benefit from the opportunities offered by the deep and comprehensive free trade areas between Georgia and the EU. Well, of course, what's really happening here is that EU policy is being driven into Georgia with the money, take the money, and along comes all the rest of the European Union political ideology. We did just pick up this bit because it refers in the article to the Early Transition Countries Fund, which it says is supported by Canada, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Japan, Korea, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, and right at the end, the United Kingdom. So here we are, an up-to-date article by the European Bank, clearly indicating there is no such thing as Brexit, in my opinion.
But the other part of this, of course, is is bringing Georgia closer to the European Union, just like Ukraine, puts pressure on Russia.
Indeed. So if I can just add that one on screen, we'll bring in the caption, which is the EU iron geopolitical fist in the velvet banking glove.
Absolutely right. House prices in the UK are on their way down, it seems. This is at least according to Halifax. They're saying that they've fallen to the lowest rate for 4 years. Martin Ellis from the Halifax said housing demand appears to have been curbed in recent months due to deterioration in housing affordability, driven by the sustained period of rapid house price growth in 2014-2016. Signs of decline in the pace of job creation and the beginnings of a squeeze in households' finances as a result of increasing inflation may also constrain the demand for homes. I was just surprised that they weren't blaming Brexit for this, but there
Russians,
you go.
The Russians,
or
probably.
the Russians, yeah. But good news, because Andy Burnham has been made the mayor of Greater Manchester, which is fantastic, isn't it? Well, I'm not really going to comment too much on it, other than to say that this is what he had said in Prospect magazine in December, because, of course, him becoming a mayor of Greater Manchester, along with the other city mayors and regional mayors, is part of the devolution process. And what he said in December 2016, was that devolution presents such a potent opportunity for Labour, not just to unite and renew, but much more importantly, to change fundamentally the governance of our country and make it more equal. And this is the point that we have been trying to make for several years now at the UK column. The governance of this country is being changed. They're not telling us what it's being changed into, but the UK column is trying to inform people about what it's being changed into. And what it's being changed into is not the best place to go. So please get on the UK column website, have a look at the Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate, have a look at that article. Also have a look at the Shared Societies Project article and the other couple of fairness articles that go alongside that. But you need to understand what this devolution agenda in Britain is all about. It is about changing the way that we are governed, the governance of this country. And it's if you think that things are bad under the so-called representative system that we have at the minute, just wait until they have fully implemented this participatory system that we've been warning about for so long.
Big society. And it's absolutely big society, Mike, and people think that Cameron's gone, so big society has stopped. On the contrary, Theresa May is now driving it forward with a vengeance, and Theresa May, with a greatly enhanced majority, represents, I think, one of the most dangerous prime ministers and dangerous periods in British history, as she utterly destroys the nation state.
Now, let's have a look at the fake news and censorship agenda. And this is a story from India that I wanted to highlight, because what happened here was that one person produced a photoshopped image of Prime Minister Modi. It was a satirical thing. It was designed to make political statement about Modi. And a day after he had posted this to social media, he was arrested. And the local administration issued an order restricting people from posting what they described as misleading information or rumor on social media groups. And not only that, they have said that anybody running a group on social media, from now on, it would be a requirement that they know everybody that's in their group personally, and they would be held to account for everything that's posted on a social media group. Probably best to know everybody personally, because in case somebody posts something that the state doesn't like too much, because it will be the owner of the group that's held responsible for anything that's posted on the group. So India really cracking down on commentary, political commentary, and this takes the whole fake news thing to a slightly different level. And I do wonder how long it's going to be before we start seeing this type of thing in this country. But in the meantime, Facebook, according to the Telegraph and the BBC and a whole host of other mainstream media outlets, has deleted what they're describing as thousands of UK Facebook accounts in a crackdown on fake news. And of course, alongside that, they posted ads in mainstream newspapers, because they think that the best place to explain about fake news is in the mainstream newspapers. So they posted ads in the Times, in the Guardian, the Daily Telegraph, and it included a list of 10 things to look out for whenever you're deciding whether a story is genuine or not. That includes checking the article's date, checking the website address, making sure that it isn't intended as satire. So possibly good advice. But it does amuse me slightly that they chose the mainstream press to publish this advice, because, of course, the mainstream press is increasingly becoming purveyors of fake news. But let's just remember what it was that Damien Collins said, who was the chair of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. He is concerned about fake news in the run-up to the election. And he said the danger is, if for many people the main source of news is Facebook, and if the news they get on Facebook is mostly fake news, they could be voting based on lies. And there's so much wrong with that statement. I mean, aside from anything else, you take the average politician, there's nothing comes out of their mouth other than lies. So if we look back at the last, goodness knows how many decades of voting, it's all been based on lies, Brian. So any suggestion that what is appearing in as fake news in Facebook, that might cause people to vote based on lies. Yeah. If that's a concern, then really he's living on some other planet.
There is that, Mike, and the other thing which comes into my mind is that what is Facebook is an individual web page, if you like, for an ordinary person who wants to get online and they want to put information up. That man judges them and says, well, anybody who wants to do something themselves, they're not really capable of finding out what the truth is. Everything they put up is going to be fake. So it's a gross insult by these elitists in Westminster. As you say, they lie through their teeth, whether they're speaking in person or there's some election manifesto coming into being. People need to be tackling Facebook as a company to register their dissatisfaction. At the moment, I just see people giving in to this stuff.
Yep. Well, speaking of fake news, Andrew Wakefield, of course, since Vaxxed was shown in the UK and in Ireland, the mainstream media has been behaving in a pretty apoplectic manner. So this is the latest hit piece. This is in the Times. Charity cash funds anti-vaccine doctor, in quotes, and they're alleging him of misusing money that has been gathered through various non-profit organisations for the purposes of promoting the anti-vaccination, or at least his concerns about vaccination. Where is this coming from? Well, it's a joint venture between the Times and Channel 4 News, and particularly this woman, Cathy Newman. So this is on tonight on Channel 4 Dispatches, and it's called Trump, the Doctor and the Vaccine Scandal. Cathy Newman, that says, reveals the role played by the disgraced British doctor Andrew Wakefield, who was struck off by the GMC 7 years ago in Donald Trump's administration. She asks whether the president's opinions on autism have been shaped by Wakefield's views on the topic. Now, of course, this is the same Cathy Newman who has worked so hard to promote fake news stories about Aleppo, and particularly to promote the white helmets and the and Al-Qaeda terrorists when Eastern Aleppo was under the control of Al-Qaeda terrorists. So we're going to show an episode of the UK Column News on the live stream immediately after this program, where you and I and Vanessa Beeley discussed this issue of Channel 4 News and their promotion of the fake news agenda, and particularly in Syria. And then we ask ourselves why this particular person would be behind the hit piece on Andrew Wakefield.
Well, I think we might be able to guess, but this is a good thing, isn't it? Of starting to take the lid off, not the organisations that form mainstream, so-called mainstream news, but the individuals. It's the individuals who are the ones who are sensitive. If they're doing the wrong thing, then people should be emailing, tweeting, and talking about them. Well, the close down perhaps is also going to happen in this way. So Russia today, with this report that one of its journalists was picked up by the French police. This particular lady, Ms. Dubensky, was reporting on protests on the streets following the elections in Paris. The police come to her, tell her to stop talking on her phone, and then she's initially put into groups with other people, and they are later picked up, taken to another area of the Paris suburbs and detained. She did manage to tweet out. She said, "Police still holding me somewhere in northern suburbs of Paris. Where is the freedom of the press?" Well, of course, France at the moment is a police state. It's still got the emergency laws in power. There were some 50,000 French police and military personnel supposedly protecting the French elections. But of course, here we see where that goes. First of all, we have emergency powers, then we have a full-blown police state, and after that, of course, there's not going to be any freedom of the press, because the press is the real danger to a police state. Same thing happening in UK, same thing happening in the States at the moment.
BBC was tweeting a little video clip out this morning with the caption, "Could you answer these maths questions? Primary school children in England are currently sitting their SATs exams." Now, it has to be said that I'm aware that in Plymouth, at least, the standards are pretty low, and not, the percentage of children that are even going to reach the national standard, this a standard set by government, is very low. But the point of this little video clip was that most of the people that they stopped in the street were not able to do those two pretty basic sums. Well, the BBC is putting this out. It's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? Since the BBC seems to have trouble counting up to £3.6 billion, Brian, particularly for BBC Media Action, for example, because they're busy begging for more money. So clearly they can't count their budget each year and don't have enough to distribute to the various tentacles of the BBC machine. So perhaps there's a bit of hypocrisy in this.
Quite a lot of hypocrisy. And on the subject of the BBC, we continue to watch BBC Reality Check. And really, if you go and have a look and see what the BBC is doing here, all they are doing is reworking the political line. So this is nothing about checking information that's coming onto the internet. This is simply about taking a government policy, maybe fiddling with the figures one way or another, but the basic policy is then pushed through. So BBC Reality Check, it's a BBC political propaganda machine, and I'm just going to label it fake news as well, because we can't rely on this for any worthwhile thing. We'll end today on important overseas news, and I'm not really smiling, but this is what the Daily Mail thinks that we should know about, is that in Melbourne, Australia, they've got street artists covering themselves in paint and pressing their nude bodies against brick walls in a very revealing street art exhibition. I looked at this article and I thought, is this really the state that Great Britain has got to now, where the Daily Mail can push this forward as if it is international news?
Yes.
We can look at it, we can laugh, we can snigger, we can do all those sorts of things. But really what this is telling us is that if we accept this, then I think we deserve everything we're going to get with Theresa May running the country as Prime Minister. Don't know whether I could be more explicit than that.
No.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our news today. I'd like to say thank you very much to people who've been making donations to the UK column, and also people who've been donating to the British Constitution Group. Thank you very much to those people that have done a recurring payment for the British Constitution Group. That's what was promised at the Nottingham Moot, and we're delighted to now see those donations coming on stream. There's a lot of work to be done. People at the moment asking, what can we do in this election period? To which we say, get out there challenging these MP candidates on all the key subjects. Don't give them a moment's rest, whether it's a phone call, a visit, an email or a tweet or a letter.
And don't forget the hustings.
And don't forget the hustings, if of course they bother to turn up at those hustings. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.